the earlier you are in your career, the less wrong you can do. In terms of like most things, most opportunities that you see before you, you should just optimize for learning. Like, what are you most interested in learning? And then just pursue that. Like, when I think about like a lot of the early decisions I made in my career, they weren't that strategic. Like, it was just like, I'm just really curious about learning this thing. I just learned it. And over time, it kind of formed my identity as a professional. But I did not lead with the identity I wanted to have because like I was given the advice of like, hey, you're probably going to be wrong on what you pick, right? So just like, just learn. So this idea of just optimizing for learning and like recognizing that like the risk of the decisions that you make professionally in terms of what you pursue are likely very, very low in the early years. It's just really, really freeing, right? And like it allows you to actually have fun and not take yourself too seriously. I think beyond that, though, is as you start to mature down a particular lane that you take, and you're now thinking about like, moving into management and leadership and all that stuff, is understanding that like, there's high level pillars to successful leadership that are agnostic of domain, discipline, or stage of company. But then when you come down one level of abstraction, there are certain profiles of leadership that are conducive to certain environments and certain stages of business. And knowing this helps you pursue leadership in the scenario that is most congruent with what you can provide, right? So what I mean by this is like, if you look at like the VP of product or head of product role, right? In most companies, that role does not, like a person does not stay in that role for like longer than 2 or 3 years. They'll just kind of, a company will just go through a lot of them. And you can see that on paper or on LinkedIn and be like, oh, this company has a problem. Why can't they keep their leaders? And it's like, it's actually not that. It's that what the business needs changes so drastically through these inflection points that there's certain profiles of leadership or kind of like personas of leadership that lend themselves well throughout different stages, right? So as you go down your path of management into leadership over time, something that you do want to start to develop, and it's good to do this through like, like talking out loud to other people and starting to like understand your stuff a bit more, getting a coach and all that stuff. When you begin to understand like what kind of profile you are, then you'll pursue the opportunities that allow you to really maximize the value you can have to a business, right? Because the worst thing to do is to have a really, really strong leadership archetype, but then put yourself in the wrong environment, right? Like there are leaders that are like, they're all about 0 to 1, where they're like, bring me in early, let me help you get from nothing to something. And then when you're at something and you need process and structure, I'm out, right? And it's not like, oh, I'm a bad leader. It's like, I'm really, really good at this phase, right? And then there are leaders where they're like, oh, blank canvas, that gives me like nightmares. What I like is to bring process and order and structure, right? So you bring them in right when you hit product market fit, where you now need to like start laying down practices for like, recruiting and like learning how to scale a team. And then there are people where it's like, okay, once I do that and now we hit scale and now you need me to like, just like 10x this org and 10x the opportunity. I can't do that. I don't think in the orders of magnitude. I think in linear, right? Cool. Then right? So like over time, like this is not something you'll understand day one, but over time you'll begin to understand like, what do you like accelerating? Do you like accelerating nothing to something? Do you like accelerating something to scale? Do you like accelerating something from scale to like infinite scale, right? And then you find the opportunities that help you really maximize the value you can have on businesses. I know this is a very common piece of advice, but I'll say it because it's right, is to build your kind of like support system or mentorship group, right? I think 2 early things that helped me when I started doing this was one, understanding the difference between a mentor and a coach, right? Like they're not the same thing, right? A mentor, it's more like a pull relationship. Like I have a thing I'm dealing with, like this person's good at that. Let me like ping them and ask them for help, right? I see a lot of people email someone and say like, hey, I'd like you to be my mentor. Can we meet monthly? I'm like, that's not a mentor. That's a coach, right? A coach serves a different purpose. So understanding the difference between those two. And then the other thing I would pair that with is understanding that when it comes to a mentor in particular, it's actually good to have a few mentors, not just one, right? And understand what they're uniquely good at. So for me, I have a Rolodex of people, right? Where it's like, oh, if I'm dealing with like org design, these are my 2 people who I go to. But I would not ask them about like, like design strategy, because that's not their superpower. Maybe I have these 2 people who are really good at design strategy, but org design is not their superpower, right? So I've kind of like built up a Rolodex of people where it's like problem, mentor, like, the group of people who can help me here, right? So I think that those are 2 good elements to think about when you're starting to build out your support system. I think a third nugget that I would add to the support system route is that, as you're now growing in your career, it's usually good to have people who are ahead of you, people who are moving alongside you, and then people who are behind you. So what I mean by that is like the mentor and coach really help for the people who are ahead of you, right? People who've done the thing you've done before, who can kind of like give you guidance and like help you like avoid, walls, right? But it's also good to have people alongside you, people who are like kind of like in the race at the same stage or whatnot, dealing with the same challenges, right? It allows you to knowledge share, knowledge transfer, all that stuff. And then the people behind you, the folks that you are now giving your time and attention back to, I actually think there's a selfless benefit to it, but there's also a selfish benefit to it, which is if you've ever tried to coach someone on something, it actually reinforces your own learnings, right? Like anytime I hop off a mentorship call, I leave with a to-do list of things that I need to do. Like halfway through, I realize I'm starting to talk to myself, right? Like I'm reminding myself of my own lessons. And then like, oh crap, I should actually go email that or go do that thing or whatnot, right? So those are kind of like the three things I would say there, right? Like understand the difference between mentor and coach. On the mentorship side, how to Rolodex, people who map to different areas, understanding that no particular person is good at everything. And then like when you now complete that circle, have people ahead, people beside, people behind.
Do you mind expanding more on the difference between coach versus mentor relationship? What do you do different? Yeah. You're mostly mentorship. I don't know if you do coaching as well, but what do you do different Oh, you coach one person. What do you do differently?
Yeah, so mentorship, like I mentioned, is more a pull relationship, right? Like a mentor, honestly, if they check in on you, that's just icing on the cake. But if they never do, like they haven't failed as a mentor, right? They show up as a mentor when you pull from them, like I need this thing. They tell you what you need to know, right? And that's it. A coach is more an accountability partner, right? Like the coach needs to learn how you think, right? Like almost like your failure mode thought cycles, so that they can catch you when you go into them, right? So for example, I know that one of mine is that like, if you give me a subject and you give me an infinite amount of time to talk about it, I can convince you about whatever I want to convince you about like over some period of time, right? But that's the thing that I need to be caught on by my coach, because then if I'm trying to really like correct something or change something about myself, I can't convince myself that like the next action is no action, right? So I need my coach to catch me there, right? But in order for them to catch me, we actually have to have like a standing relationship set up. We need to be like meeting weekly or monthly or what have you, right? As part of that too, you should be aligning on your goals with your coach, right? So that they kind of like hold you accountable to that. Like, are you actually progressing? But I think that like a coach, really, when you have that structure, they're holding up a mirror. They're helping you identify like when your own thought cycles or thought patterns are getting in the way of the goals that you want to have. They know the goals you have and they kind of pester you, right? Like they're almost like this, just slightly annoying. A mentor is never going to be annoying, right? They're going to tell you the thing that you want to know. A coach is like, they're just a little bit annoying, right? So if your mentor's annoying you, maybe they should be your coach, right? And if your coach isn't annoying you, maybe they should be your mentor.
Where did you find the coaches and mentors that you work with, and how were you found by your mentees and people you're coaching?
That's a great question. So a practice I used to do very early, and I learned it from someone, so I won't take credit like it came from my brain, but was ask your folks for folks. Basically, if you know someone, ask them for mentorship or whatnot. But if you don't believe that you have a person within your circle, people tend to undervalue the richness of their second degree network, right? Like the people who your people know. Right. So if you're trying to find someone for something, just ask people like, hey, who are the best people you know in this thing? And it just widens the reach that you have. One of my closest mentors is Bob Baxley. He leads design at ThoughtSquad. And how I got in contact with him was years ago. I was building this thing called Playbook, which was like it still exists, but like it's kind of like this like knowledge learning platform for product designers, right? For designers. And I knew that fundamentally what I was building was a Q&A platform. So I wanted to understand like Q&A design, right? So I asked some friends, I'm like, hey, like, oh, that's awesome. I wanted to ask some friends, like, hey, like, like who's the best Q&A people, right? And then someone was like, have you met Bob? Like, he was the first design leader for Yahoo Answers, one of the oldest Q&A things. I'm like, I need to talk to Bob, right? And I started meeting with Bob, and then over time, like we developed that relationship, right? So, it started with a very tactical thing. I wanted to know how to build Playbook well, but then it's kind of like graduated into general design leadership now, right? But I never would have met him if I just relied on my first degree contact. So my key insight there is like, ask the people you know who they know, and you will likely find someone. And then I think the second part of the question was, how do people find me? I think it's similar, right? I think like they're like most of the things are introductions, which then, presumes that someone asked someone and then that person said, you should talk to Jared.